there, and in this video I'd like to share with you the sequel of the true story of Cinderella. Now, there are many little girls who have read the story of Cinderella, the fairy tale that stops with the happily ever after. And in the main, they're convinced by the fairy story. They find the thought of the happily ever after, hand in hand, walking off into the sunset or sitting in the palace, is a very, very attractive one, because for them it reflects the safety of an idealised childhood. Most children don't actually have that idealised childhood, but they do have that hankering for safety and happiness. Why on earth wouldn't they? But some little girls are less gullible than others. And the heroine of this story is one little girl who didn't buy into the fairy tale. She thought for herself. She actually thought about the fairy story. She applied it to herself, not in the slavish way that many of us do, of thinking, gosh, I'd love to be rescued like Cinderella. I'd love to have a prince sweep little old me off my feet and elevate me to the queen of a kingdom in the fullness of time. I'd love that. I'd love someone who would recognise what I'm worth and really make me feel worthy. She didn't go for that. She was a little girl who was very much of her own opinion, and she was a little girl who actually believed in her own worth. Maybe she was more blessed than some. Maybe she had two parents who made her feel special. I don't know. But the fact is, she had a good idea of her own specialness. And it was from that point of view that she looked at the story of Cinderella. And when she looked at the story of Cinderella, not as someone who desperately wanted specialness conferred upon them, but as someone who already had that specialness about them, she was a little troubled. She thought Cinderella was a bit too dependent on getting approval from other people. And she thought about the story and she thought, what would I do if I were in Cinderella's clogs? You know, the ones that she wore to knock around the kitchen when she was cleaning and sweeping and doing all the hard work for her ugly sisters and her stepmother. And she thought, I would want to hold on very much to the sense of my own specialness. I couldn't change them, but I wouldn't have to believe what they believed about me. So I could think to myself, why do they behave like that towards me? And I could look at them and say, they behave in a lot of ugly and unkind ways. Now, that says something about them, not about me. How they behave relates to how they feel and how they think. It's not my fault, and it's certainly not my responsibility. So there's not much that I can do to change them, because there's more of them. They're bigger than me. They're more powerful than I am now. So I'll just have to watch and wait. And when the time comes and I'm older and more powerful, then I can start to do things my way. And one day I can pack up my little bundle, put it on my stick and say, ugly sisters, It's been absolutely lovely, and now I'm off to make my own way in the world. And that made her feel really quite good. And she carried on thinking about the story, and she thought about the fairy godmother, and she thought, yeah, I'd like a fairy godmother. I'd like someone to wave a magic wand for me, but you know what? There'd be something a whole lot better than that. And that would be waving that magic wand for myself. Making that magic happen for myself. So I don't have to sit at home and go, oh, it's not happening for me, and hope that a magic fairy godmother will appear out of nowhere. And what happens if she doesn't? How many opportunities would I miss? So I want to make that magic happen for me. And what's the best way that I can do that? So the little girl started to think about how you make magic happen. And she thought a lot about it. She thought about breaking magic down into small steps. How do you get to know the people who will be fairy godmothers and fairy godfathers to you? How do you make the contacts, create the situations, and take the small steps that will allow you to connect with them? And she thought about the meeting with the prince, who was so moved by the beauty of Cinderella and of course by her mystery. She was the fantasy. And the prince, being a bit shallow and a bit of a flirt, pursued a fantasy. And she thought to herself, when I'm a grown-up, I will want someone who will love me for who I really am, not the dream that I represent for him. I'm not a dream. My dream is to be accepted totally for who I am. And she thought about the glass slipper. Would I really want to marry someone because he discovered that my foot fitted a glass slipper? Is that why I would want a man to choose me? And she thought, absolutely not. Nor would I accept the hand of a man who I barely knew because he said, "Oh, Cinderella, we had such a great time at the ball last night, and your foot fits my slipper, or the slipper that you abandoned, so please be my wife." Why would I do that? When I go out to the shops now with my pocket money to choose a magazine or to buy a toy, I think about what I want. Why would I just accept a husband out of the blue because he was there? I'd want to know an awful lot about him. I'd want to know whether he enjoyed the same kind of fun things that I do. I'd want to know whether I could be happy with him, as happy as I am on my own. I'd want to know what kind of prince he was, whether he was a bossy, self-important prince who was used to ordering people around, or whether he was a true prince among men who treated everybody as an equal. I'd want to know how he behaved when things didn't go quite right for him, whether he was a blaming, point-the-finger sort of prince, or whether he was a thoughtful prince, a prince who was prepared to say, "Okay, this isn't going right now. Let's see how I can turn this around for myself. She thought, I want a prince with whom life felt magical. I'd want a prince with whom the time I spent felt magical. I'd want that magic. And I'd want to have a prince who would be happy for me to have my own life and my own joys and my own friends and my own pets and my own teddy bears if I wanted them, whatever I want. I wouldn't want a prince who'd say, oh, that's stupid, do it my way. You've got to do it my way anyway because I'm more important. I'm the prince and you're just lucky to have me. I wouldn't want any of that. In fact, I'd probably chuck the glass slipper at him if he ever tried doing that. And the little girl thought about the happily ever after. And she tried to make sense of it. What did happily ever after mean? How come that was a punchline of fairy tales and yet nobody told her how to do the happily ever after? What did that mean? The little girl wondered whether that meant it didn't really exist, or the fairy tale writers didn't know how to describe it, or perhaps they were stumped because quite a lot of people in fairy tales aren't that nice. And if you're not that nice, and you're not really nice to other people, it's really much harder to be happy with someone else. And the only kind of happiness she wanted in her life was the kind of happiness that took its pleasure in seeing that people around that happy person, were happy too. She didn't want happiness at anyone else's expense. And she certainly didn't want a prince to be happy at her expense. So the little girl thought about it and she thought, sometimes I worry about these adults. Maybe it's because they're grown-ups that they don't think things through properly. And they don't have time to focus on happiness and fairy stories and things like that. Maybe they've forgotten. Maybe they've forgotten how important it is to be happy. Maybe they've forgotten about the magic of life. Maybe they've forgotten about the thrill of discovery and of being your own person and of having fun and of days filled with laughter. And she made a secret vow to herself that she would never forget, that she would never stop letting those things be the most important things in her life. And do you know, she never did forget, and she went on to create, day by day, minute by minute, a very, very happy life for herself. Bye for now.